we have a situation where there's no silver bullet. We need to apply biosecurity measures consistently, and we need to find ways to do that. So that's the challenge.
Welcome everyone to the Swine Canada podcast show, brought to you by Wisenetics. We are dedicated to bringing you the latest and greatest in the Canadian pork industry. So sit back and be ready to expand your knowledge and stay ahead with today's episode. So I'm Miranda Smith and I'll be the host for today's episode. And with me today, I have Dr. Jean-Pierre Vaillancourt, who is a professor at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Montreal. But he's also an associate director of the World Veterinary Education in Production Animal Health, and he's a leader of the World Animal Biosecurity Association. And I think in that latter one, that's what we're going to talk about, biosecurity. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, so before we get started on talking about biosecurity and maybe like how technology plays into that, can you first give us a little bit of a background of how you got into this role?
Well, essentially, I got my master's on porcine pleuropneumonia, and then I moved to the University of Minnesota for my Ph.D. And there I work with the Swine group, Al Lehman, Carlos Pijuan, Tom Stein, all these people. But I was not really, I was working on pre-winning mortality. And at that time, it was PicChamp that was starting. And they were telling me, we have all this data on hundreds of thousands of sows and the parodies and all that stuff. So it would be easy. I mean, we're just going to give you the data. You're going to be able to do the analysis. You'll be in and out. But then I realized that the data was not valid. Mainly at the beginning of PicChamp, there were a lot of ways that you could enter data, and the system at that time. Okay, it has improved, but at that time, they not pick up. For example, if you would foster off and not foster on, or vice versa, things like that. So you get all sorts of results. And so I started paying attention to when I'm provided with data. Is it real or not? Fast forward to eventually I ended up as a professor at North Carolina State University. And at that time, I was being told, if you want to become a full professor at the university, you need to convince us that in case of a problem where your expertise would be needed, you would be shortlisted by the White House and for a task force. And so being trained as an epidemiologist, epidemiologists go right and left. They look at risk factors in different ways. I thought I got to focus on something, so that I can really get to be knowledgeable and recognized. And at that time, in swine, like in poultry, a lot of infectious diseases had been emerging. And it turns out it's always been the case, but I think it's been picking up over the past 30 years. And so that's why I started focusing on biosecurity. And that's when I realized that in that field as well, sometimes we have problems with data that are not necessarily valid. So, there's a lot to be done there.
Yeah, so as we talked before the show a little bit, you mentioned a mystery disease that was going around. So, what did that turn out to be, and how have we evolved from there till today in biosecurity?
Yes, well, of course, we're in 1990. We were trying to eradicate pseudorabies in Minnesota, and all of a sudden we have this disease that was obviously infectious. We were calling it mystery disease, and it turned out to be PRRS. And at first we thought, okay, well, we need to focus on traditional biosecurity, and we had a lot of failures anyway. So one argument could be, well, it's because people are not doing it right. Then some people, one colleague, Robert Desrosiers from Canada, actually suggested, well, maybe it's being airborne, and that's how it's getting in. There was a lot of resistance against that at the time. I remember several individuals, well known, who would say, no, there's no evidence. We've been looking into this and we don't think it's that and all. Well, it turned out that that was certainly one way for the virus to get in. So what we've seen is, of course, the development of technologies, HEPA filters and all that on some farms in strategic locations where you have high density and all that. And but then I got calls from veterinarians and swine growers saying, you know what? We got these HEPA filters and it did a great job. It's doing a great job as far as reducing the incidence. But now we see that the virus is just walking in because people are looking at having, these HEPA filters and all and saying, well, now, I don't need to worry as much about traditional biosecurity. So we have a situation where there's no silver bullet. We need to apply biosecurity measures consistently, and we need to find ways to do that. So that's the challenge. And as I looked into this, by the way, what's really cool is that I realized that everything we're trying to do on swine farms, all these measures are actually in the Old Testament. These measures were essentially identified in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy. You go in there and you're going to find essentially the principles that we're trying to apply on swine farms. These are books were written 2,400 to 2,600 years ago. So, I was thinking, well, we haven't invented anything. But so if the principles are known, if the measures have been known for actually centuries, we need to find ways to get people to do it consistently. Now, that's the stuff that you won't find necessarily in the Bible or in any text. We need to develop that, and that's where technology could be useful.
So do you have any examples of technology that has been coming out in the last few years that can help people to be compliant with biosecurity regulations?
Sure, and I'm actually working on some of that. We're using sensors. So sensors can be used for regional biosecurity, where you have like sensors on trucks, on vehicles, on trailers, on anything that moves, so that you know in real time what is what and where it's going. You can do the same thing with people, having like an app on their phone that will detect when they're coming in, because you can put virtual fences around production sites. And so you can detect in real time who's coming in, where they're coming from. You can have their coordinates. You have a lot of stuff that can be done for regional biosecurity. But the big issue often is at the entrance of the barn. People are told, change boots, wash your hands, put on the coveralls, things like that. And it's not always done. And we know that. And so now what we can do is use antennas that will detect, and you can put microchips, for example, in boots that stay on the farm. And so if you have like an antenna that could detect if these boots are going on the wrong side of an empty room, then you can trigger real-time alarms. We've been testing that, where if people, for example, are going from one zone in the empty room to the next where the pigs are, and they do not activate the Purell dispenser, for example, the hydroalcoholic gel dispenser, it's not activated, but they are moving in anyway. We can detect that with sensors, and that allows us to record it, and also to be able to tell people, hey, what are you doing? You can trigger an alarm, a sound, or you can trigger a message that they'll have on their phone. And a lot of that is actually useful for training purposes. So one thing we need to look at again is how we train people. But these sensors, first of all, they're cheap, and they can allow, for example, if you're not doing things right, it could trigger a mechanism that would prevent you to get in, to be in contact with the pigs. Now, of course, you need to have safety features so that if somebody needs to get in because somebody's sick inside, you need to be able to override these things. But this is actually old technologies that we are starting to look at in order to be, it's not maybe the right way to say it, but as idiot-proof as possible. In the sense that we all know what to do, but sometimes we just forget, or we're tired, or we're in a hurry. We need to just go quickly, and we don't want to go through the whole process. We have all sorts of reasons to not comply, but each time, we're playing Russian roulette when it comes to biosecurity failures and eventually getting pathogens in. And so that's an example of technology that can be very useful for detection, for training, and for improving biosecurity.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I definitely agree with you that it's so easy to just do one step outside of the barn because you have to drop off something or pick up something, or there's just so many ways to quickly do something wrong. And so yeah, if we have a system that tells you instantly, like, hey, this is wrong, that definitely helps people to get trained better. So yeah, very interesting. So do you have any other ideas for technology in this area, or is there other things that you're working on?
Well, I mean, when it comes to the technologies that are being looking at cameras, for example, it's been used more or less depending on. I've known swine farms that have used cameras to eventually get evidence of what's going on, and again using it for training. The thing is, all these technologies are going to be useful if we know how to match that with interventions, with humans, essentially. A lot of that is happening in hospitals, for example, because they have the same problem. I mean, with doctors and nurses not washing their hands or not being in the right place correctly and all that. So I think that, we have this strictly technology part, and then you have the human factor, human components. We need to merge that. So, for example, I've got a project right now where we're using the technologies I just described, but we're also working with an industrial psychologist so that we can develop basically training programs that are adjusted to the personality of the individuals, to their emotional intelligence, to their attitude. There's several factors that we know play a role when it comes to do things correctly, that we need to match with what the technology will provide us. Because technology can, for example, prevent entry, things like that, but it's mainly a way to gather data. And, we're at an age with artificial intelligence and all that, where data is a huge thing. But the question is, how do we use this properly?
So do you think we can truly change people's behaviors?
Yes. Again, there's no, I would say, it's no magic bullet. But we know why people don't comply, right? We have because that's another thing. In animal production, what's remarkable when you talk to specialists looking at compliance for just about anything, what they tell us is, when NASA is trying to send somebody to the moon, they need to make sure everybody's doing their job. And so compliance is an issue for all sorts of businesses. And in many places, they've been basically applying strategies and technologies. How come you guys are not doing it? You know, so and one big issue is feedback. What we've discovered in human medicine and veterinary medicine as well is that people need immediate feedback when something happens. The more you can provide them with feedback in general, and as close as possible to any kind of event, the proper feedback, you can really modify their way of behaving. Basically, actions by people are determined by their personality. Banks, for example, when they hire somebody, they will get you to take a test because they want to know if you fit within the banking system, if you fit well into one part of their organization versus another. Should you be in contact with the cash or not? What's your, are you have a tendency to be detailed oriented or not? So that can be useful, for example, knowing about personalities, not for employees that we're trying to hire to shovel manure, but for some mid-level management that could be useful. In emotional intelligence, there's what you call normative belief. Basically, what we know is that people's behavior on a farm will partly depend on how they perceive other employees or the owner, the manager, how they perceive their attitude, their way of understanding a situation. They will adapt more or less their actions based often on others. Another big issue that we've been looking at is what we call perceived control. If we know, because it's been tested many times, that people, if they don't feel that they are in control of a situation, well, they'll find a way to get out of it or to get the job done. And so they will cut corners because they feel that they do not have what's needed to do things properly. So what is needed? Knowledge, having the skills, having the training, having the material. How many times on a farm we've been asked to wash our hands, there's no soap or there's no running water, things like that. So perceived control is also a big deal. So all these elements are basically being looked at all at the same time. And the idea is how we can work with the right people to change their behavior and monitor this. And what another important point that the psychologists are telling us is if you are detecting that somebody is doing something better than another person, then what you need to do, and it's very important, is to provide information so that people can compare themselves to others. Now, at first, you could say, whoa, some people will have a problem with that. But it can be done in a way that's positive, because if you create an environment where there's some kind of competition, but I would say a friendly one, that's when you can really start seeing major changes in behavior in some people. And so, but for that, you need the data, and you need to know how to approach individuals and get them to compare themselves. That's why, we have exams. That's why we have different ways. We have incentives also. You have all sorts of incentives that do not require a lot of money, but that can have a tremendous impact on how people will behave. I mean, for example, look with armies. Napoleon created the Legion of Honor and had hundreds of thousands of people willing to die to get that medal. Okay, look at Olympic athletes. I mean, they will literally, completely focus on one event in 4 years from now to get a medal. When you think about it, I mean, so it doesn't have, now of course those analogies may not fit exactly with a swine farm, but you know my point is that there's a lot of stuff you can do to encourage individuals to change behaviors, but most of these things, they have to be positive. You know, if you just go and say, if you don't do this, I'm going to fire you, you're not going to go very far.
Very fair. A very interesting topic, because this is way more in the psychology than in the animal science part, but you need both.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the highly pathogenic avian influenza that is going around. So should we be worried about that as pork producers?
I think yes. First of all, as we speak, this H5N1 is officially in 105 countries in the world. It's a pandemic in the animal level. Just on the bird side, we have at least 489 species that are known to be infected. When it comes to mammalians, we have dozens of species, including pigs, because we've had, like, for example, a case in Oregon where in the United States, where you had birds that were in close proximity to pigs. Now, that was not a commercial operation, but they know how the pigs got infected, and that was via the water. Okay, and it's not the first time we see this in the United States. There was another occasion, and that was remarkable. It was an H2 virus that got infected by birds, and ducks and pigs got infected. Two separate farms, because they had the same source of water and the water was not treated properly. And what's remarkable is that the H of that virus was the same from the pandemic in humans in 1957. So these influenza viruses, they come and go, but they tend to stick around. Right now, with the H5N1, we have several variants going on. And the one right now that has been spreading coast to coast and from the west to the east, it's an H5N1, but the strain is D1.1. That's the strain that got a 13-year-old person in BC extremely sick. There's a person in the United States who was a 65-year-old individual with other health issues, but that person died with the same D1.1. Now, that D1.1 is coast to coast, at least from BC to Quebec and possibly into New Brunswick. So we need to pay attention, because the reason the virus is so successful is because it is excreted in spectacular amounts by wildlife, in particular ducks. I mean, we're talking excretions that is up to 1,000 times higher than what we've seen with other strains in the past. And so the environment is contaminated. It's been happening year after year. Now, we have less cases now in commercial operations, but the virus is sticking around. And so the risk remains that a swine producer could basically walk the virus into a swine operation just by not changing boots and walking into fresh, feces from a wild bird. So we need to pay attention to that.
Okay. And so you mentioned the water. So was that like they had both access to the same like lake or whatever, or was it in the groundwater?
No, it was, well, you see, the virus itself is not very resistant in the environment, but if it's got enough organic material and the temperature is pretty cool, it can survive hundreds of days. And we have about 2 million lakes in Canada, okay? And it's often cool in our country. And there's plenty of organic material. So the conditions are perfect. Before, we would see this virus in poultry in a very seasonal basis. By that, I mean, maybe October, November, December, it would disappear. You would never see it in the summer. Well, that has changed. We still have seasonality with more cases mainly in the fall versus the spring. So yeah, we have some seasonality, but there's not a month now in the world where you cannot get cases with this virus. And if that virus can replicate, basically reassort with a swine influenza, I mean, that's kind of what we had with H1N1 in 2009, if you recall, in Mexico. That virus, that we call the swine virus, was actually about as avian as it was swine, and it actually had a human component as well. So that's what we're concerned about. I mean, there could be a major impact on growers as far as public health officials would get involved. You may not have to eliminate the pigs, but you would find yourself under quarantine, and that could evolve very quickly. If all of a sudden we realize that this is full-blown zoonotic and employees are getting sick, then we could have a situation actually worse than the H1N1.
And you mentioned that even though we have more contamination in the environment, there has been less outbreaks on farms. So is that because of higher biosecurity, or are there other reasons for that?
Well, we hope so, but there's also the fact that we're hoping actually that wildlife is getting more and more immune to it. And animals that are immune to the virus may still shed the virus, but they will shed it less than non-immune animals. So we think that that's possibly what's going on. But I would like to get back to one point about emerging diseases. We were talking about mystery disease, and then we had, of course, other diseases in swine. The emergence of infectious diseases is nothing new. In swine and in poultry, you have that just about one a year. If it's not a new disease, it's like a new strain of a known disease that will pop up and will create issues. This seems to be picking up in speed. What we're looking at right now, we're working, we're post-COVID, we're paying attention to the concept of One Health. And so that means that now we're talking to ecologists, biologists, of course, molecular biologists and public health officials and all that. And so right now we're looking at the environment and what has changed. And we've found, for example, in our case, if you look at the avian influenza, that there are some major changes that have occurred in some ecosystems, mainly in the north of Russia, where you have animals that didn't used to meet, or when they would migrate south, used to have different paths. But now they are meeting, if not in the north, coming down towards Canada. And then they have their own microbiotes, and they basically exchange pathogens. So we don't know yet how important climate change is when it comes to creating more opportunities for new variants and new pathogens to pop up. But we fear that this thing will have an impact. And so we're not looking at something that will eventually disappear and will be fine. It's probably going to be something that will always be an issue. And keep in mind that in humans, they've had 5 to 6 emerging or re-emerging infectious diseases every year since 1942 on average. So COVID-19 was just one of them. And so there's no reason why in swine we would not see the same kind of, well, maybe not 5 or 6 per year, but some movement. And so that's why we have to stay vigilant and find ways to actually apply correctly the measures that we know work. Because, we have plenty of evidence. There's a lot of stuff in the literature showing that doing proper decontamination, getting everything to dry properly, changing boots, washing hands. I mean, all these things work. But when we fail, it's because it's not being done.
Yeah, fair. And, I think biosecurity, I was thinking before we were talking on this episode, like it's a very timely topic because, of course, we have PED and then there's ASF always lurking in the background. And so, like, everyone hears about biosecurity every day. But it sounds like that's not going to change. Like, biosecurity is always going to be a very important part of producing pigs.
Yeah, and we need to see the big problem is that because we see failures, too many people will say, well, it doesn't work. Look at it. We have cases. They don't, they fail to recognize that maybe there was a failure in the application of the biosecurity measures. It's not necessarily the biosecurity that doesn't work. The other thing, though, is, mainly when you're dealing with pathogens that can go airborne and all this, the time has come to really focus as well on regional biosecurity. And if you look at what we're learning from the major issue of high-path AI in poultry, what's happening in Europe, they're ahead of us because they've had many more problems than us. Now they're really putting together in some countries like Italy, and France is probably going to do the same thing, putting norms so that you cannot just build a farm wherever you want, okay? Now, in Canada, you cannot do that because of the environment. You have to be careful about where you're setting up a new farm relative to water, the water table and stuff like that. But we don't have formal regulations preventing somebody to build a big farm next to another big farm. Well, in Italy now, if you want to do that, they have basically a process, and depending on the risk factors that they can identify, they may actually deny a construction of a new site somewhere. What they found out as well is that if you look at the epidemiology of some of these diseases, there are some times of the year where it may not be, or some types of productions in some regions, now it's saturated and you should no longer keep producing there. You'll need to go elsewhere. There's basically right now, the Italian government is forcing integrated companies. So we're not talking small producers now. We're talking Veronese, which is like a huge integrated companies with hundreds, if not thousands of farms. They are forced now by the government to look at some areas, and they may determine, the government may determine that in this place we may have 4 farms that will now need to be doing zone raising. What I'm saying is, not only you go all in, all out on your production site. Let's say you're raising pigs. You don't have. You're not doing. You don't have breeders there. So you don't have a maternity, but you are producing pigs. They may go and say, well, you have 4 farms here. You'll need to be able to be all in within a week and all out within a week.
Wow.
Together. You need to talk. You need to coordinate so that we can manage risk better. So that's another reality that this AI situation in poultry is bringing to us.
Well, and I think that's something that Canada probably doesn't need to worry about yet as much, just because we have so much space.
No, because yes, it's right. We have a lot of space, but we have areas of high concentration. Yeah. So whether it's in Quebec or Ontario, and like on the poultry side, I work right now on it. BC has over half the outbreaks of high-path AI in Canada. There's a reason for this. In the Fraser Valley, you can walk from one farm to the next. That's a problem. In the United States, they're having bigger issues. Why? Also because they have huge farms. If you have 6 million animals on one site, like they do, or in dairy, they have like 14,000 cows in the same place. When you have this situation, you need a lot of employees. That means a lot of traffic going in and out, a lot of opportunities for the virus, any kind of virus, mainly viruses, but also bacteria. Look, for example, and this is very old research, 1985, Mycoplasma pneumoniae in pigs. Okay, what are the two top risk factors associated with reinfection? Well, the size of your neighbor and how close that neighbor is from your site. So, and that was like, 40 years ago. So we've known these things. The big thing is now, maybe it hasn't hurt enough for us to actually act on it. But I can tell you that what's happening in poultry is going to force things like that. And the pig industry could be next, mainly if we start seeing things like African swine fever coming in, for example. And, where I'm located right now in Europe, they're looking at it very seriously because the Germans have it, the Italians have that virus as well. Belgium is trying to eradicate, but I can tell you I'm right now sitting in France, and they kind of feel surrounded right now. And so they're starting to pay attention because, and there's another thing is that there's, society is also looking for a different type of production where animal welfare is a bigger consideration. And that's one reason that in many places in the world, they are producing pigs outside, at least part of the time. And that brings its own set of issues. Now, in Canada, because of the weather, we would not be doing that year round. But if we start seeing these type of productions where pigs are allowed to go outside, then we'll have to face another series of risk factors.
Well, and we do have small-scale producers who have grow finished pigs who they grow out during the summertime, right? So, and we are seeing that part of the industry increasing. So, we do have it to some extent.
Yeah. But the wildlife is an issue in poultry, but I think is going to be a big issue for swine as well. If you're looking at wild boars, we didn't used to have any in Canada, but now we do. And they estimate that they have 5 million of those in the United States, and they're monitoring these guys, and they're moving north. Okay, so we have to prepare. We have to take this seriously.
Well, and I have heard that the wild boar are spreading on the prairies as well. They're going further and further north. So
they're extremely smart. They are extremely good at. I was part of an emergency committee in France when they had the problem in Belgium. So it was very close to the French border, French-Belgium border, and so we looked at different ways to prevent these wild boars that could be infected with ISF to come in. And we discovered all sorts of interesting things. For example, they know they're good as far as hiding. And if you are trying to use, for example, dogs to seek them out, well, it can be counterproductive, because if your dogs are too big, they're going to be motivated to actually leave the area where they are. And then you're going to actually favor the spreading of the virus by doing this. So there's all sorts of actions. They tried having snipers at night to kill wild boars at the border. And they discovered that, again, these animals, they adapt to the reality, to any kind of situation you bring to them. That's why we need to be really smart about this. There's many things we can put together, but the take-home message is that it's not simple. It requires sometimes several measures in order to be successful. And that's often how it works with biosecurity, because mainly if you don't have 100% compliance in biosecurity, if at least you have 2 or 3 layers of measures, if one fails, well, the other one may not, and then you'll still have protection. That's how we need to look at it as well.
It's time for our famous 3. Wisenetics turns podcast airtime into brand authority. We don't sell ads, we elevate voices. Curious how far your voice can go to become a reference in the industry and attract more leads? Scan the QR code and discover how we can turn your expertise into unmatched brand authority. Let's transform expertise into influence, starting now.
Okay, well, I think that is a great take-home message for everyone. So with that, I'm going to move on to the final 3 questions.
Yeah.
So the first of those would be, what is your favorite swine-related book or resource?
Well, in my case, I would say what I like is the Journal of Swine Health and Production. It's basically, I think it's the American Association of Swine Veterinarians who are producing this journal. It's been in production for possibly 20, 25 years at least. What I like, it's very applied. I'm not a lab person. I like to be in the field. I like to see the application of things. And so I would say when it comes to pigs, that's a source that I really enjoy looking at.
Okay, perfect. What about a favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Well, I tell you what. Well, first of all, as far as a resource to get something, I often go with Google Scholar to seek articles or books. And the book that I like the most tends to be the one that I'm reading as I'm talking to someone. And right now, I'm reading a book that's called Managing Emotional Intelligence at Work. Unfortunately, well, it's a new book, but it's in French. So, but there are other books about, where we're talking about human factors. I think that, people in animal production, whether they are veterinarians or producers, when you think about it, yes, we are dealing with animals, but we're dealing a lot with people. These productions, like swine production, they are productions on wheels. There's somebody behind the wheel. And so we need to understand better this human animal so that we can have an impact or have better results. And so right now, I would say the book that I enjoyed the most has to do with trying to understand better how humans work, way of speaking. And another thing I would like to say, I often go to Paris for meetings, and I've discovered. Well, first of all, I'm a member of the French Academy of Medicine. As a foreigner, I'm not a full member because I'm not French, but and they have a remarkable library there, and basically there they have books that are hundreds of years old, and if you look at those things, it's remarkable what you can find that's interesting. You won't find technology there, but you will find a lot of great ideas that have been buried in these books for a long time. That's how I ended up even in the Old Testament to realize that, hey, we haven't invented anything. We just need to improve what we know works.
Okay, very interesting. And then the last question is, in your opinion, what sets successful swine professionals apart from those that are not?
I would say that I'll just recall I looked at an old YouTube interview of Jean Béliveau, who was a captain for the Montreal Canadiens, decades ago. I met this individual, this great player, a couple of times, and he was being asked something similar as far as about leadership and his success, and he was saying, well, discipline and respect. And I think when it comes to leadership or to successful, I look, what's great about my job is that I go to different countries on farms. And wherever I go, and whether it's in Africa, in Europe, Latin America, or Asia, I was not too long ago in Bangladesh, for example, the best individuals, the best growers I find, they're all very disciplined. And when you go on their farm, you can tell they have their act together. That's the number one thing. And the number two thing, I think they are very respectful in general. So they're respectful of everybody. I think that allows them to be listened to, and they also seem to respect the rules in a way. Like I think they can be very creative, but they don't try to cut corners. So respect and discipline. If you have these two attributes, I think you'll go a long way in terms of being a producer, a leader in your field.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Okay, perfect. So this concludes another episode of the Swine at Canada podcast show presented by Biosecurity. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Bye-bye.